Welcome back to the channel. There are moments in life when someone simply steps away from the world and is never seen again. No farewell, no explanation, just a sudden absence that leaves an echo. Today, we are looking at a case that has haunted a family, challenged investigators, and raised painful questions about how quickly a person can vanish in plain sight. This is the story of Phoenix Coldon. On December 2011, Phoenix was 23 years old. She was intelligent, athletic, deeply involved in her church, and known for being quiet but self-driven. She played the violin, fenced competitively, and was attending college. To most people, she appeared to have a life with direction and meaning. Yet, like many complex stories, there were things beneath the surface that were not always visible to others. That afternoon, Phoenix was at home in Spanish Lake, Missouri. Her parents later recalled that nothing seemed unusual. No argument, no sign of distress. At around 3 p.m., Phoenix walked out the front door, got into her black 1998 Chevy Blazer, and drove away. She did not say where she was going. She did not indicate when she would return. To her family, it felt like an ordinary moment, one of those everyday departures we assume will be followed by a homecoming. But she never came back. Hours later, her SUV would be found abandoned in East St. Louis. The vehicle was still running. The keys were in the ignition. The driver's door was open. Her phone, her bag, and her glasses were still inside. The engine had not even been turned off, as if someone expected to return at any second. And yet, Phoenix was gone. There were no signs of struggle, no witnesses who could say where she went next, and no clear direction to follow. It was as though the moment she stepped away from the car, her path disappeared. Her family immediately reported her missing, but the investigation quickly became complicated. The SUV was found across state lines, which caused confusion over which agency should lead the case. Time, those crucial first hours, when answers are most possible, slipped away. As days turned into months and then years, theories multiplied. Some believe Phoenix may have chosen to leave her life behind. Others feared she encountered someone who meant her harm. Still others suggested she may have been coerced or pulled into something she could not escape. None of these possibilities have ever been proven. What makes Phoenix's story especially heavy is the silence surrounding it. There has been no confirmed phone activity, no financial transactions, and no verified sightings since that December day. It is as if her trail simply ended. Today, her family continues to search, holding on to hope while living inside a question that has never been answered. How can someone vanish so completely and yet leave everything behind? Hours after Phoenix left her home, her black Chevy Blazer was discovered in East St. Louis, roughly 20 minutes away from where she lived. The scene was unusual in a way that felt almost staged. The engine was still running, the keys remained in the ignition, and the driver's side door was left open. Her glasses, her bag, and her phone were still inside the vehicle, as if she had only stepped away for a moment and intended to return. This was not the kind of place someone from her neighborhood would normally stop. The area was unfamiliar to her, and it was not along a route she regularly traveled. There were no parking lots, no nearby stores, no obvious destination in sight. It raised more questions than it answered. Why was she there? Did she go intentionally, or was she brought there? The vehicle itself told a silent story. There were no signs of a struggle, no clear indication of an emergency. Nothing inside the SUV suggested that Phoenix had left in a panic. Yet, the fact that she did not take her personal belongings, items she relied on every day, suggested that whatever caused her to step out of the vehicle happened quickly. The location complicated the situation. East St. Louis lies across the state line from Spanish Lake, meaning that the search and investigation would soon involve more than one law enforcement agency. With different jurisdictions came gaps in communication, delays in gathering information, and confusion over who was responsible for handling the case. These early delays are often described by those close to Phoenix's family as lost time that could never be reclaimed. Witnesses in the area were scarce. No one stepped forward to say they had seen Phoenix at the scene. The SUV was not reported to Phoenix's family right away. In fact, her parents did not learn about the vehicle's location until several days later, when they began calling around themselves. By that point, any information that might have been present in the first hours had already faded. The car became a symbol of the case, a moment frozen in time, with everything left in place except for Phoenix herself. It was as if life continued moving forward everywhere else, while this one scene remained untouched, waiting for answers that still have not arrived. Even today, the image of her SUV sitting there, engine humming into an empty street, remains one of the most unsettling details of her disappearance. It suggests departure, interruption, and mystery all at once. It is the last confirmed trace of Phoenix, a presence marked only by her absence. On the day Phoenix disappeared, nothing seemed out of place in the Coldon household. It was a quiet afternoon on December 18, 2011, and the small details of the day felt ordinary. Her parents recall her being at home, sitting in the living room, wearing comfortable clothes just like any other Sunday. There was no sign of distress, no argument, and no announcement that she planned to go anywhere. At around 3 p.m., Phoenix stood up, walked out the front door, and got into her black Chevy Blazer. She did not take extra belongings. She did not say where she was going or when she would return. To her parents, it seemed like a small moment, maybe a short drive, maybe a break to clear her mind. Nothing that suggested the beginning of a mystery. This detail is one of the most haunting parts of her disappearance. So often, in missing persons cases, there is a final conversation or a clue in someone's tone. But here, there was silence. A normal moment that became the last time anyone in her family saw her. Later, as investigators and journalists looked deeper into Phoenix's life, a more complex picture emerged. Phoenix was balancing two worlds, the life her parents believed she was living and a more independent identity she had quietly built on her own. She was still enrolled in college, but it was later revealed that she had stopped attending classes months earlier. She was also spending time with people her family did not know, and she kept a second phone that they were unaware of. These details do not provide answers, but they expand the emotional landscape of the case. They suggest that Phoenix may have been carrying personal struggles quietly, not because she intended to leave, but because she was trying to figure out how to navigate adulthood, identity, relationships, and expectations, something many young adults face, though rarely with consequences this heavy. Still, the act of leaving home that day remains unexplained. There were no known appointments scheduled. No one reported expecting her. There were no text messages or calls indicating urgency. The moment feels suspended, a quiet departure that became the boundary between before and after. If Phoenix had planned to leave permanently, it would seem unusual to walk out without taking essentials like her ID, money, or even her glasses. If she intended only a short drive, it leaves an equally difficult question. What happened during that brief time outside the house? The last sight of Phoenix stepping out into an ordinary afternoon is a reminder of how fragile the thread of everyday life really is. One small moment, one unknown decision, and everything can shift into uncertainty. To this day, no one knows what she was thinking. where she intended to go, or what or who she encountered after leaving home. One of the most confounding aspects of Phoenix's disappearance is the absence of physical evidence. When her SUV was found, nothing suggested a confrontation or an urgent attempt to get away. The car was not damaged. Her belongings were not scattered or disturbed. It looked as though she had stepped out of the vehicle calmly, maybe expecting to come back and simply never returned. Investigators examined the interior of the SUV and the area around it. They did not find footprints that could be confidently tied to Phoenix, no fingerprints belonging to an unknown person, and no noticeable objects left behind by someone else. In many cases, a scene can provide direction, marks on the ground, items dropped in haste, tire tracks, or even a witness who recalls seeing something unusual. Here, there was none of that. What complicates this further is that no one has been able to confirm what Phoenix did after leaving her home, or how her SUV ended up in East St. Louis. There are no verified sightings of her walking away from the car. There is no surveillance footage showing her leaving the area. No passers-by came forward with accounts of seeing a young woman matching her description nearby that day. This lack of direction, this blank space, is what has made her case so difficult to move forward. Investigations often depend on timelines, and Phoenix's timeline stops abruptly the moment her SUV was found. Even modern investigative tools offer no traction here. Phone records go quiet shortly after she left home. Her financial accounts show no activity after her disappearance. Her social media, active before, went completely still. It is as if she slipped out of the digital world at the same moment she vanished from the physical one. Some investigators have pointed out how unusual this is. In most disappearances, even if someone intentionally leaves, there are traces of planning, withdrawals, purchases, messages, travel records. In Phoenix's case, everything stops at once. The stillness is total. For her family, this is one of the most painful parts of the story. Without a path, there is nothing to follow, no place to begin again, and no way to measure progress. The absence itself becomes a kind of presence, a constant reminder that the truth remains somewhere out of reach. The unanswered questions gather in the silence. Did she leave the car willingly? Did someone meet her there? Was the car driven by Phoenix or by someone else after she left home? And if she stepped away, why did she leave behind the things she needed every day? These questions remain open, not because no one has tried to answer them, but because the scene gave nothing back. The world around her last known location stayed quiet, too quiet, and has stayed that way ever since. As investigators and journalists looked deeper into Phoenix's life, a more layered picture began to emerge. To her family, she was a focused and responsible young woman rooted in faith, music, and academics. She played the violin in church, fenced competitively, and had grown up in a structured, closely connected household. But outside the familiarity of home, Phoenix had been building a life that her parents knew only pieces of a life, with more independence, more questions, and more emotional complexity than anyone realized at the time. One of the first revelations was about her education. Although her parents believed she was continuing her college studies, records later confirmed that she had stopped attending classes months before her disappearance. She had not shared this with her family. It is unclear whether she made the decision alone or felt overwhelmed by the expectations placed on her, but it suggested she was trying to navigate the transition to adulthood quietly, perhaps without wanting to disappoint the people who believed in her. Another discovery was that Phoenix kept a second cell phone, one her parents did not know about. This phone connected her to people and social circles that were not part of her family's world. The calls and messages showed friendships, relationships, and emotional struggles that she did not speak about at home. None of this implies wrongdoing. Rather, it reflects something many young adults experience: the desire to define oneself outside of the identity shaped by family. But these separate worlds can create pressure. Trying to maintain them both without overlap can feel heavy. Phoenix may have been balancing expectations, personal desires, and questions about her future, all without a clear way to talk about it. Friends later shared that Phoenix sometimes felt caught between who she was expected to be and who she wanted to become. She was proud, private, and did not like asking for help. So, even when she felt uncertain or overwhelmed, she carried those thoughts internally. This part of her story does not provide answers about what happened to her, but it offers context. It reminds us that a disappearance does not always begin on the day someone goes missing. Sometimes it begins quietly, as a person struggles with change, identity, independence, and fear of disappointing the people they love. There is no evidence that Phoenix intended to leave permanently. There were no goodbye messages, no withdrawal of money, no steps that suggest she was preparing to start over. But there was a sense that she was searching for something: clarity, space, or simply room to breathe. Her story is a reminder of how inner lives can be hidden, even from those closest to us. Behind the smile, the music, the routine of daily life, Phoenix may have been trying to understand her place in the world, a journey many face, but few speak openly about. And then, one day, she stepped outside and never came back. In many missing person investigations, phone records provide direction. Calls, texts, pings from cell towers, even if small, can help investigators trace where someone went and who they were with. But in Phoenix's case, the trail ended quickly, almost as soon as it began. After Phoenix left her home on December 18, 2011, her phone showed brief activity, small, ordinary signals that confirmed the device was still functioning. And then, suddenly, everything stopped. No more calls, no more messages, no data usage. The phone went silent. At first, investigators hoped that the phone might have been turned off intentionally, perhaps suggesting that Phoenix chose to distance herself for personal reasons. But as more time passed with no activity at all, the silence took on a heavier meaning. Cell phones rarely stop communicating altogether. Even if someone is not using one, background signals still register. For Phoenix's phone to leave no trace, something decisive had happened. Complicating matters further was the existence of a second phone, the one Phoenix had kept private from her parents. That phone also stopped transmitting data after her disappearance. No outgoing or incoming calls. No verification pings from nearby towers. No GPS data to trace. The timing suggested that whatever occurred, it happened swiftly and left little time for Phoenix to reach out, respond, or send a signal of distress. Investigators asked an essential question: was the phone turned off by Phoenix or by someone else? The answer remains unclear. If she turned it off herself, it could indicate she wanted privacy or space, but that possibility conflicts with the abandoned SUV left running with her belongings inside. If someone else turned it off, the situation becomes more concerning, but there is no proof leading in that direction either. The lack of phone evidence also means there is no confirmed last known location beyond where her SUV was found. In many cases, tower pings can narrow down movement from neighborhood to neighborhood, even street to street. Here, the trail simply ends. No travel pattern, no digital footprint, just stillness. For her family, this silence is one of the most difficult parts to live with. Phones are deeply personal objects. They connect us, hold our memories, our routines, our voices. Phoenix kept her phone close. Friends said she rarely ignored messages. So the sudden cutoff feels unnatural. And it leaves the painful question of whether Phoenix could have reached out, and what it means that nothing was ever sent. Years later, even with advances in technology and renewed attention on the case, no new phone data has been recovered. No cloud backups. No new tower hits. No recovered accounts. The silence remains complete. And in that silence is the unanswered question at the heart of the case. If Phoenix, he was able to speak, if she still had control, why did her voice fade so suddenly from the world? When a person disappears, the first hours are often the most critical. Information is fresh, memories are clear, and the trail is still warm. But in Phoenix Coldon's case, those early hours were marked by confusion, not because no one cared, but because no single agency took ownership of the investigation quickly enough. Phoenix left her home in Spanish Lake, Missouri. However, her SUV was found in East St. Louis, Illinois, across state lines. This meant two different police jurisdictions were involved. Each had its own protocols, priorities, and paperwork. Neither side immediately recognized that they were both dealing with the same case. And time passed. When the SUV was first found, it was towed, processed briefly, and logged as an abandoned vehicle. At that point, law enforcement did not yet know that the driver, Phoenix, had been reported missing. By the time her parents located the vehicle themselves after days of searching and phone calls, any footsteps, impressions, or passing witnesses who might have seen something were long gone. The Coldon family has spoken openly about how painful that delay was. They never blamed any single person, but they have expressed that the system itself was not built for speed in cases like this. There was no coordinated search launched immediately. No alert distributed widely. No ground teams canvassing the area in those first crucial hours. Even once investigators became involved on both sides of the state border, communication between agencies was inconsistent. Records were not always shared promptly. Leads took time to cross desks. Requests for information had to move through official channels that were slow by nature. This is not uncommon in missing person cases involving more than one jurisdiction, but in Phoenix's case, the consequences may have been significant. What could have been a narrow question, where did she go from the SUV, became a larger, more uncertain one as time passed. There was also another complication. Phoenix was an adult. At 23, she had the legal right to come and go as she pleased. Unless there was evidence of danger or foul play, authorities could not assume she had been harmed. In the early days, that possibility that she had simply left her life voluntarily shaped how urgently the case was treated. It is not that the investigation was uncaring, it was simply slow, fragmented, and without a clear direction. By the time more serious attention was placed on the case, the trail had already cooled. Her parents continued to search on their own. They held press conferences, distributed flyers, followed leads that sometimes took them across multiple states. They did everything a family could do, while hoping that someone, somewhere, might remember something. But the truth is, the moment Phoenix's SUV was left on that street, and no coordinated investigation began immediately, the story shifted from an active search into a case defined by unanswered questions. As the years passed, and the official investigation slowed, theories began to fill the space left by the lack of answers. Some came from anonymous calls, others from people who believed they recognized Phoenix in unfamiliar cities. Some came from individuals claiming to have known her. But despite the volume of tips, none of them led to confirmed evidence. One of the earliest and most persistent theories suggested that Phoenix may have voluntarily stepped away from her life. People pointed to the hidden phone, the private relationships, and the academic struggles she had not shared with her family. They wondered whether she felt caught between the identity she presented at home and the life she had begun carving out privately. It was not an impossible scenario. Many young adults face the pressure of expectation and independence colliding at the same time. However, this theory has cracks. If someone chooses to start over, they usually leave signs: money moved, belongings taken, records of travel, attempts to build a new life in a new place. In Phoenix's case, there were none of those. Her financial accounts remained untouched. Her identification and daily personal items were left behind. The way her SUV was found suggested interruption, not planning. Another theory emerged, one that suggested Phoenix could have encountered someone who manipulated or coerced her. This idea stemmed from interviews with acquaintances who described Phoenix as kind, trusting, and sometimes willing to put the needs of others above her own. It is a trait many admired, but also one that could place someone at risk if they crossed paths with the wrong person. Still, without evidence or witnesses, this theory remains speculation. The theory that gained the most public attention came years later: the possibility of trafficking. After the Oxygen documentary aired in 2018, multiple viewers called in claiming they had seen a woman who resembled Phoenix in cities far from Missouri, often accompanied by individuals who controlled her interactions. The descriptions were unsettling. But when authorities followed up, none of the sightings were confirmed. The resemblance was never enough to verify identity, and no direct link between Phoenix and such networks has ever been found. The truth is, each theory reflects a different kind of hope. Hope that she left voluntarily and is living somewhere quietly, or hope that understanding what happened could lead to her return. But hope is not evidence, and every lead that faded only deepened the sense of mystery. These theories highlight the emotional weight of the case. Phoenix was not someone who disappeared without leaving people behind. She was loved. She was known. And losing someone who is known leaves a specific kind of ache, the ache of believing that the answer must be out there somewhere, but never being able to reach it. In the end, none of these theories have been proven or disproven. They simply exist in the silence around Phoenix's story, possibilities suspended in uncertainty, waiting for the piece that fits. For several years after Phoenix disappeared, the case received limited national attention. Her family continued searching, hosting community events, organizing independent searches, and following leads on their own. But without a central breakthrough, the story remained mostly quiet outside the circles that knew her personally. That changed in 2018, when the case became the subject of a televised documentary titled The Disappearance of Phoenix Coldon, produced by the Oxygen Network. The documentary brought Phoenix's story to screens across the country. It shared interviews with her parents, friends, and investigators, and it highlighted the emotional and investigative complexity that surrounded her disappearance. The series raised awareness, not just about the case itself, but also about the broader struggles families face when a loved one goes missing and the trail grows cold. For Phoenix's family, the documentary felt like a chance, maybe not for closure, but for momentum. And in many ways, it did exactly that. The series generated a surge of new tips. People from different states called in, claiming they had seen someone who resembled Phoenix. Others suggested connections to communities, shelters, or circles she might have passed through. Some individuals said they remembered speaking with a young woman who seemed lost, anxious, or in need of help. For a brief moment, it felt like the silence around the case might finally be breaking. But once investigators followed these leads, the momentum slowed. Some sightings turned out to be cases of mistaken identity, someone who looked similar but was not Phoenix. Other tips were based on secondhand stories, or memories that could not be verified. A few leads seemed promising at first, but eventually dissolved under scrutiny. And so, even with renewed attention and public compassion, no new evidence was found. What the documentary did reveal, however, was the emotional weight that Phoenix's family had carried for years. Viewers saw her parents speak about the pain of not knowing, the strain of searching without support, and the difficulty of waking up day after day with the same unanswered question. Many viewers felt this deeply, and some began asking why cases involving young women of color often receive less media attention than others. The documentary sparked discussions online and in communities about representation, urgency, and whose stories get amplified. Some argued that if the case had received this level of attention in the first weeks, rather than after 7 years, the outcome might have been different. Yet even powerful discussions cannot replace evidence. The 2018 documentary did not reveal new clues, did not identify new suspects, and did not clarify what happened to Phoenix. What it succeeded in doing was reminding the world that Phoenix was real, that she was a daughter, a friend, a young woman with hopes and challenges like anyone else. It did not solve the case, but it made sure her story was not forgotten. At one point in the investigation, there was a moment when it seemed like the search for Phoenix might finally have an answer. Not the answer anyone hoped for, but at least something to break the silence. Authorities were looking into the case of an unidentified woman, a Jane Doe found in East St. Louis, not long after Phoenix disappeared. The location was close to where Phoenix's SUV had been discovered, and the timing appeared to line up. To many, it felt like a possible connection. The Coldon family was notified. They knew this was a situation no parent ever wants to face, but they also understood what it meant to live without answers. They agreed to pursue DNA comparison to determine whether the unidentified woman could have been Phoenix. Waiting for those results was difficult. There was anxiety, grief, and a quiet, heavy hope. Not the hope that she would be gone, but the hope that they might finally know something. In missing person cases, the unknown itself can become its own kind of pain. Answers, even painful ones, can bring clarity. When the results came back, the answer was clear. The Jane Doe was not Phoenix. The relief and heartbreak arrived together. Relief, because it meant there was still a chance Phoenix was alive somewhere. Heartbreak, because it meant the family was still living without answers. The search would continue, and the uncertainty would stay. This moment stands as a quiet turning point in the narrative of the case. It reinforced the reality that speculation, hope, and possibility would continue to rise and fall, but hard evidence remained limited. Every potential lead would have to be examined carefully. Every whisper of information would carry emotional weight. For investigators, the DNA exclusion reaffirmed that the case was still open, still unsolved, still waiting for new information. For the family, it was another reminder of how close and how distant answers could be, sometimes both at once. One of the most striking parts of this chapter is how it reflects the emotional landscape of the entire case. Searching for someone who left no trail means living between hope and fear, clarity and confusion. The Jane Doe was a door that opened, briefly, and then closed again. And so, the mystery continued. The questions remained. Where did Phoenix go after she left her SUV? Was she trying to reach someone? Was someone waiting for her? Or was she simply overwhelmed, searching for space, and met with something unpredictable? The Jane Doe case did not solve the mystery, but it did affirm one thing. Phoenix was still out there somewhere, and her family would keep searching. One of the most striking and unsettling elements of Phoenix Coldon's disappearance is how completely her trail ends. In many cases, even when a person goes missing, there are fragments of activity that help investigators piece together what may have happened. Phone pings, bank withdrawals, social media logins, GPS data, or sightings supported by time and place. But for Phoenix, none of those things exist. Her presence, both in the physical world and the digital one, simply stopped. After her SUV was discovered, investigators checked her bank accounts, credit cards, and cell phone records. There were no withdrawals, no purchases, no calls made, and no attempts to log into any of her accounts. Her social media, once active, never showed signs of being accessed again. There were no messages sent, no changes to passwords, no updates of any kind. In today's world, where almost everyone leaves a constant digital imprint without realizing it, from apps running in the background to location services, that kind of silence is rare. It suggests that either Phoenix was prevented from accessing her accounts or that she entered a situation where she could not, or did not feel safe to, reach out. But again, those are interpretations, not evidence. The facts remain quiet. Even more telling is that there were no confirmed sightings after the day she vanished. Tips came in, yes, people calling to say they believe they had seen someone who looked like her, but not one of those sightings could be verified through cameras, documentation, or witness consistency. Every lead, when examined closely, dissolved. The absence of physical evidence is equally troubling. No clothing, no personal items, no objects connected to her were ever found outside the SUV. Search teams looked in surrounding areas, walked wooded paths, checked abandoned structures, but they found nothing. It is as if Phoenix stepped out of her car and the path behind her erased itself. For her family, this is where the emotional weight becomes almost unbearable. Not knowing is its own kind of grief. When there are no clues to follow, every possibility remains open, and every possibility carries a different kind of pain. Was she somewhere safe, but unable to return? Was she struggling, trying to find a way back? Was she harmed and hidden so well that no evidence remains? The silence keeps all of these questions alive. For investigators, cases like this are some of the most challenging. Evidence guides direction. Clues determine where to look next. But when a case has no evidence, there is no trail to follow, only time passing. And time, in missing person cases, is both a reminder and a thief. It reminds us of how long answers have been needed, and it takes away the freshness of what might have once been discovered. The day Phoenix disappeared is the last day her life left a trace. Everything after that is a blank page, one that has remained unwritten for more than a decade. Today, more than a decade after Phoenix Coldon disappeared, the case remains open, unresolved, and deeply painful for the people who loved her. Her parents, Goldia and Lawrence, never stopped searching. They have organized search teams, spoken publicly, appeared in interviews, followed leads across states, and rebuilt timelines again and again, always hoping that one detail might finally make the difference. They describe living in what they call the space of not knowing. It is a place where hope and grief exist side by side. Hope, because there is no proof that Phoenix is gone. Grief, because every day without answers weighs heavier than the one before. What makes the case particularly difficult for her family is the lack of closure. There is no confirmed evidence to explain whether Phoenix left voluntarily, met someone she trusted, or encountered danger without warning. There are no messages to read between, no last words to interpret, no decision that clearly marks the turning point. The story is full of beginnings, but no conclusion. Yet even in the absence of answers, Phoenix's family continues to speak her name. They hold on to the belief that someone, somewhere, may know something, even if it is small, even if it seems insignificant, even if it has been buried in memory for years. They believe that bringing attention to her story keeps the possibility of truth alive. There is also a broader conversation that Phoenix's case has contributed to one about whose stories receive attention, whose disappearances are amplified, and how communities respond to missing person crises. Many have pointed out that disappearances involving young women of color often receive less media exposure and fewer investigative resources. The Coldon family has spoken about this openly, not to divide, but to highlight the importance of visibility. They know that awareness can change outcomes. Still, beyond the discussions, beyond the theories, beyond the years, there remains one clear and simple reality. Phoenix is missed. She was a daughter, a musician, a competitor, someone who laughed, who learned, who struggled, who grew. Someone who was trying to figure out her place in the world, just like so many young adults do. The people who loved her remember her not as a case, not as a mystery, but as a person with memory and presence, light and complexity. Her disappearance is not the end of her story. It is the unanswered chapter. And so, the search continues, not just for evidence, but for understanding, for truth, for the moment where silence finally breaks. Until that day, Phoenix remains where she has been since December 18, 2011, somewhere between presence and absence, known and unknown, remembered and waiting. Some stories stay with us because they refuse to resolve. They linger in the mind, asking questions we are not equipped to answer. Phoenix Coldon's disappearance is one of those stories. It challenges our assumptions about safety, identity, and how quickly a life can shift into uncertainty. It reminds us that not all mysteries are solved with evidence. Some are shaped by silence, absence, and the weight of what we do not know. If there is one thing to hold from her story, it is this: someone knows something. Even the smallest detail, a memory, a conversation, a moment someone once overlooked, could one day change everything. For Phoenix's family, hope has not faded. It has changed shape, perhaps, but it remains present, steady, quiet, and waiting. They continue to search, to speak her name, and to believe that answers are still possible. If you or anyone you know has information, even the smallest piece, consider reaching out to the appropriate missing persons organizations. Time has passed, but it has not erased the truth. It simply waits to be found. Thank you for spending this time with us today. Take care of yourselves. Take care of the people around you. And as always, we will meet again in the next story.